Well, we finally got the biggest news of the offseason as LeBron James has decided to sign with the Philadelphia 76ers. And now that most of free agency is in the books, I wanted to rank every team in the NBA heading into next season, so let's jump into it. And we're going to start at the bottom for these rankings. So coming in at number 30, I have the Sacramento Kings, and honestly, this feels like a team that finally has no choice but to fully commit to the rebuild. Darius Acuff Jr. is the clear headliner here as they drafted him 7th overall in this year's draft, and he should get a ton of on-ball reps right away. Sacramento also added in Alex Caravan and Emmanuel Sharp from this year's draft, so there is at least a young foundation to work with, but the problem is still the money they have tied up in their veterans. Domantas Sabonis and Zach LaVine are both talented players, but they do not really fit the timeline anymore, and until Sacramento clears that out, this team feels like they are going to continue to be stuck at the bottom of the league. But then coming in at number 29, I have the Milwaukee Bucks, and this is officially the start of a new era for Milwaukee. For the first time since 2013, there is no Giannis Antetokounmpo on this roster, and that changes everything. The return they got from Miami, though, gives them some interesting pieces with Tyler Hero, Jaime Jaquez Jr., and Kel'el Ware, but this is still a rebuild. The bigger long-term story, though, to me, is the draft, because Braden Burries and Nate Ament give them two real building blocks that they can develop, with Burry specifically looking awesome in the Summer League already. And I don't think this team is ready to win right away by any means, but they are also not completely empty, and Milwaukee could be bad this season, but more interesting than people expect. Up next to number 28, I have the New Orleans Pelicans, and at this point, it is just hard to understand the direction of this franchise. They have talent. Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy, DeJounte Murray, Jeremiah Fears, and Derek Queen is not a terrible group on paper, but every year, it feels like something gets in the way, and they refuse to make a move, it seems. There's been health issues, fit, roster balance, decision-making, all of it. There has been something that just always seems to come up, and Zion is still the biggest swing piece on this roster, but he has always been the biggest question for them for years now, and New Orleans has not done much this offseason, if anything, and that makes it hard to see a real leap for them this upcoming year. And unless Zion is finally available and dominant, this feels like another missed playoff season for New Orleans. But coming in at number 27, I have the Brooklyn Nets, and Brooklyn is actually really interesting to me, but mostly because of the long-term picture of this roster. Michael Brown Jr. comes in as the 6th overall pick and gives them a potential franchise guard, and he should immediately become one of the main focuses of the season. But the roster construction is still messy, to say the least. They have a ton of young guards. They added win-now pieces like Julius Randle, Keon Ellis, and Mo Wagner, and they still need to figure out who actually fits on this roster. Michael Porter Jr. looked awesome last season, and him staying healthy would help. And then you also have Day'Ron Sharpe, who could step into a bigger role, but this was a bad offensive team, a bad defensive team, and a turnover-heavy team last season, and I just don't think that's going to change overnight. Next at number 26, I have the Memphis Grizzlies, and this is where the post-Ja Morant era really begins. Memphis has finally moved on, traded Ja to the Blazers, and now the franchise belongs to their young core. Cameron Boozer is the biggest piece, and I loved what I saw from him in the Summer League. They also have Zach Edey, Cedric Coward, Kareem Lopez, and Cam Spencer, which gives them more young talent on this roster. But the issue that they have is pretty obvious. They're going to be young, inexperienced, and probably inconsistent throughout the season. And this team is going to need a real veteran presence and a long-term answer at point guard, which I think they're still looking for. But overall, I like the direction, and there is a lot of upside here, but this is not going to be a quick fix. And Memphis is going to be competitive on some nights, but they are still early in their rebuild. Then at number 25, I have the Chicago Bulls, and this is one of those teams that could be frustrating now, but really interesting later on in this season or maybe in the next few years. Chicago has built one of the youngest rosters in the league, and there is a clear emphasis on length, athleticism, and versatility. Obviously, you still have Josh Giddey there, who is still going to be the main piece. Matas Buzelis has some real upside, and Caleb Wilson gives them another dynamic frontcourt piece who look like one of the best rookies in Summer League. You brought in Dalen Swain as well, and although he wasn't the best in Summer League, I still think he has room to grow and adds more defensive tools. And then losing Colin Sexton and Anthony Simons definitely hurts a bit, but I think adding Norman Powell as a veteran offensive piece is a really good addition, and I still don't think Chicago is ready to win consistently, but if they keep this group together, the future is not bad at all. Coming in at number 24, I have the Los Angeles Clippers, and this is clearly no longer a team trying to squeeze one more run out of Kawhi Leonard, as they have agreed to a trade, but honestly, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. Now, they are potentially moving Kawhi to Toronto for Brandon Ingram, Grady Dick, and draft capital, and if that happens, it's a major reset. You obviously will have Darius Garland and Ingram, who can still keep them competitive on certain nights, but this roster is all about the future, to say the least. Keaton Wagler was the biggest draft piece as they got him 5th overall, and although he looked uneven in Summer League, I still think it's going to take time for him to develop, but he does have a chance to be really good. Then they also added Baba Miller, Nick Martinelli, and Narcia Ngoy, which is a nice start, but this roster still has big question marks like Benedict Mathurin and whether or not he's going to be back, and I think there's going to be some more changes coming the rest of the offseason. At number 23 is where I have the Utah Jazz, and I think Utah might be one of the weirdest teams and hardest teams for me to rank on this entire list. The talent is obviously there. Darren Peterson, Ace Bailey, Keontae George, Lauri Markkanen, and Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to be a really intriguing group to watch this upcoming season. Then they also turned Walker Kessler into some future first-round picks and pick swaps, which I think was good value, but honestly, I wanted Kessler to stay in Utah. The offensive upside is real, and defensively, the link could be a problem for some teams, but this franchise has been stuck between tanking, collecting assets, and trying to be competitive, and now that they got Darren Peterson, I think he might be the player who finally forces them to choose a direction. And just in front of the Jazz at number 22, I have the Washington Wizards, and this is one of those rosters that should be way more interesting than it probably will be. They got Trae Young, Anthony Davis, and AJ Debanta, which gives Washington some real star power, and then add in young pieces in Alex Sarr, Trey Johnson, Bilal Coulibaly, Keyshawn George, Will Riley, and now DeAndre Ayton, and the talent level is clearly much better than the last couple of seasons, but I think overall the fit of this team is still questionable. Trey is a great offensive engine, but he has not proven he can lead a team deep consistently. Then you got Anthony Davis, who is injury prone and may not be fully bought in, but overall the talent is just better and Washington is going to win more games, but I still think the ceiling feels limited as these young guys continue to develop. Up next at number 21, I have the Phoenix Suns, and Phoenix is not terrible. Honestly, they were better than I thought they would be last season, but I don't know how much upside here there really is. Devin Booker gives them a star to build around. The Suns also added more scoring with Miles Bridges and Luke Kennard, but losing Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal takes away some of the toughness and stability they had from their role players that made them competitive last season. You drafted Koa Pete with the 30th overall pick, and he looks like a really interesting young piece, but doesn't have a jump shot, which is concerning. But then you have Jalen Green, who's going to add more athletic scoring. I think overall the roster just feels a bit incomplete to me, but if the new wings and new guys buy into the defensive identity that we saw from Phoenix last season, I think the Suns can stay in the playoff mix, but if not, this team could be stuck in the middle. Coming in at number 20, I have the Portland Trailblazers, and this is one of the biggest boomer bust teams in the league to me. Trading for Ja Morant was a massive swing by the Blazers, especially when the price was Jeremy Grant and Chris Murray, but overall, the upside for Ja is obvious. He has star-level talent, and Portland has defenders to go around him like Tumani Kamara, Denny Avdia, and Donovan Clingan to cover some of his weaknesses, but I think the fit of Ja Morant and Damian Lillard might take some time. Both guards are used to controlling the game, so they're going to have to figure out their roles fast, and don't forget that they also have Scoot Henderson there in the backcourt, so things can get crowded, but if this works, I think Portland could be dangerous, but if not, it could go the wrong way quickly. Now, coming in at number 19, I have the Dallas Mavericks, and Dallas is still trying to dig itself out from the Luka Doncic trade that just shocked everyone and is still shocking to say the least, but I think the direction of this franchise finally looks more interesting. Cooper Flagg changes everything. He is already coming off of a Rookie of the Year season where he was awesome, and he gives this team a true franchise piece to build around. Then you have Kyrie Irving, who's returning from injury, which adds another layer to this roster, and they brought in Santi Aldama, which gives them more skill in the front court. I think the draft was also huge for Dusty May and the Mavericks after drafting Morez Johnson Jr. with the 9th pick, and then Sergio De La Rey later on in the first round, who looked really good as a point guard in Summer League, and both of those guys just give this team even more young talent to start developing. And I think Dusty May is a fascinating hire as a coach after winning a national title last season with Michigan, and although Dallas is not a playoff lock, I think this team is going to contend for the play-ins, and the rebuild finally has some life. Up next at number 18, I have the Charlotte Hornets, and I actually like the long-term decision to move on from LaMelo Ball. He is extremely talented, but the injuries have controlled the entire direction of this franchise for years. Now, Charlotte gets to fully rebuild around Brandon Miller, Con Knippel, and Kobe White, who looked awesome in his time with the Hornets at the end of last year, and I think that trio gives them shooting and a much cleaner timeline to build around. They also got Naz Reid from that LaMelo Ball trade, which I really like, and then you have Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neal, and Grayson Allen, who are all also the kind of veterans who can help young star wings that they have. And Charlotte might take a step back in pure star power on this roster, but they added some flexibility and structure to go around the guys that they wanted to build around, and I think that matters for a team that's trying to finally move forward and contend. And coming in at number 17, I have the Golden State Warriors, and now that LeBron James is signing with the Philadelphia 76ers, Golden State feels more like a fun story than a real contender. Now, the idea of LeBron and Steph Curry ending their careers together would have been incredible and something I would have loved to have seen, but now the Warriors are going to have to look elsewhere on either the free agent or trade market to find some much needed depth to round out this old roster, especially with Jimmy Butler and now Moses Moody out for the start of the year. And now that the West is young, fast, and athletic, and we have teams like the Spurs, the Thunder, and the Timberwolves that are on the rise, I think the Warriors are going to have to somehow make a big move if they want any chance of contending for another title. But up next at number 16, I have the Orlando Magic, and Orlando, I think, is one of the cleaner young teams in the league. Now, the biggest reason for optimism is simple, and that's that they are healthy. Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner have already proven they can be the foundation of a playoff team, although they took a step back last season, but injuries have slowed this roster for 2 years now. But they brought in Javon Carter, kept Jonathan Isaac on a new deal, added Nikola Vucevic, and drafted Jace Richardson. And don't forget that they got Desmond Bane to round out some of that shooting as well. And although this may not have been the flashiest offseason from the Magic, I think these moves give them more stability going forward. And in this upcoming year, Orlando should be back in the playoff mix. Coming in at number 15, I have the Atlanta Hawks, and Atlanta might be one of the most underrated teams in the East. Last postseason, they gave the Knicks more problems than anyone else, and I think that matters and is something to consider. Jalen Johnson has turned into a centerpiece of this roster. You also got Dyson Daniels and Onyeka Okongwu, who's continuing to grow. CJ McCollum and Jock Landale are both back. You brought in Aaron Wiggins and Devin Carter to give you more depth, and then the draft added Kingston Flemings, Zuby Ejiofor, and Henry Vasar, who all showed flashes in the Summer League. And I think they're going to lose Jonathan Kuminga, but that's not going to crush this roster because it already has plenty of talent. And if the development continues from all of these pieces, Atlanta has a real chance to contend in the East. Now at number 14, I have the Indiana Pacers, and I think this ranking is really about Tyrese Halliburton. We all know last year was a disaster because he missed the entire season, and the Pacers completely fell apart after making the finals in 2025, and losing the number 5 pick to the Clippers made it even worse. But Indiana did add Ivica Zubac and Kelly Oubre Jr., and they found a second-round piece in Braden Smith, although I think he may take more time than originally expected. But I think the hope now is that Halliburton comes back, the roster overall gets healthier, and this team returns to something closer to the finals version that we saw 2 seasons ago. But I do think overall the East has just gotten better, and I don't think that now that Halliburton's back automatically means they're a contender. Next up at number 13, I have the Los Angeles Lakers, and the Lakers are fascinating because the offense could be elite, but this roster still feels expensive and risky. Now, the LeBron era is over, so everything is going to run through Luka Doncic. They also have signed Austin Reeves to a max contract, added in Walker Kessler, Colin Sexton, Quentin Grimes, and Sandro Mamukilashvili, and clearly tried to copy some of the spacing and rim running formula that Luka had in Dallas. Offensively, Offensively, though, the fit makes sense, but defensively, everything is going to depend on Walker Kessler staying healthy and being worth that massive contract that they signed him to. And I think this team is going to be able to score with anybody on the offensive end. I just don't know how well they're going to be able to defend and if that's going to be enough to contend in the West. Coming in at number 12, I have the Houston Rockets, and Houston quietly had a really strong offseason in my opinion. Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun are both still there and already give them a high-level frontcourt foundation, but I think the guard rotation needed more stability. Now they get Fred VanVleet back after missing last season, which is huge. Then they added in Marcus Smart, which is going to give them additional defense and toughness. Bogdan Bogdanovic is also coming in, giving them shooting. And then they also re-signed Tari Eason, extended Steven Adams, which keeps them as a team that has a lot of depth. And Reed Shepherd and Amen Thompson still matter long term, but this offseason they can develop any more. And Houston probably isn't at the top tier yet in my opinion, but I think they are closer than people think. Now at number 11, I have the Boston Celtics, and this was easily one of the hardest teams I had to rank on this list. They traded Jaylen Brown to Philadelphia for Paul George and picks, which is going to be a massive gamble for the Celtics. However, I do somewhat understand the logic because Jason Tatum is back, and they want him to be the sole foundation of this team, and you bring in Paul George, who is a veteran, can shoot, pass, and play a more complementary role. And then Boston also added Mitchell Robinson from the New York Knicks, which I think is a very underrated signing. You got Derek White and Peyton Pritchard, who are both still there. Joe Mazzulla is one of the best coaches in the league. So overall, the Celtics are not falling apart, but trading a finals MVP level piece for an older Paul George is a really hard sell, and Boston can still contend, but I think their margin for error is much smaller now. And coming just in my top 10 at number 10, I have the Toronto Raptors, and I think Toronto made one of the biggest swings of the entire offseason as they traded for Kawhi Leonard, assuming he is going to be there at the start of next year. And even though the version of Kawhi is older than the one that delivered a championship for them, I think the upside is still massive. You traded Brandon Ingram and Grady Dick, who are both good players, but Kawhi gives this team a true closer in crunch time, and pair him with Scotty Barnes and Colin Murray-Boyles, and suddenly Toronto has a foundation of an elite defensive team. The big question, though, is going to be health, because that has followed Kawhi for years, and we all know that. But if he is right and healthy throughout this season, Toronto immediately becomes a problem in the East to me, and this was a franchise-changing swing and one that could definitely pay off. Up next at number 9, I have the Miami Heat, and this is the ultimate upside versus fit type of team. Getting Giannis Antetokounmpo changes the entire ceiling of this franchise. Miami has been stuck around the play-in range, and Giannis now gives them a real superstar, but the fit with Bam Adebayo is not perfect offensively because neither guy spaces the floor extremely well, and that means Aaron Drew Wiggins, Tim Hardaway Jr., Davion Mitchell, and the rest of their perimeter group have to hit their shots. Defensively, though, this team is going to be ridiculous. The link that they bring with Giannis, Bam, Wiggins, and Mitchell can make life miserable, and Miami gave up a lot of depth in order to bring in Giannis, but I think the best version of this team can win big, and there's no doubt about it. And coming in at number 8, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves, and this team made a move it had to make. The Julius Randle experiment didn't work, so flipping that situation into LaMelo Ball gives Minnesota a much higher offensive ceiling. LaMelo can bend defenses, create easier looks for Anthony Edwards, and give the Wolves the real table setter they needed. The concern, though, obviously is his health, because we know LaMelo has missed a lot of time the past couple of seasons. I think the other big concern, though, is losing Naz Reid, because that is a massive hit to their frontcourt depth and the fan base who loved what Reid brought. But still, Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball, Jaden McDaniels, Ayo Dosunmu, and Rudy Gobert is an extremely dangerous group if it clicks. Next at number 7, I have the Cleveland Cavaliers, and Cleveland is still good, but I don't know if they are good enough yet. Donovan Mitchell is a star, Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen give them an elite defensive frontcourt, and James Harden is another creator for them with him returning, and Malik Thomas looked great in the Summer League, so I have to mention him because he is a young guard with upside that they just drafted. But the issue, I think, for them is their ceiling in the postseason. We saw the Knicks expose them in the Eastern Conference Finals, and Harden's playoff concerns are not going away. They also missed out on LeBron James, which I think was huge for them. If they brought brought in LeBron, they would definitely have been higher on these rankings, but without him, Cleveland feels like a high floor team still searching for that piece that pushes them over the edge. Up next at number 6, I have the Denver Nuggets, and Denver is obviously still dangerous because they have Nikola Jokic, and Nikola Jokic is still one of the best players in the entire world, and that alone keeps them in the contender conversation for me. But the concern is that this roster feels a little too familiar, and running back isn't crazy if Jamal Murray is healthier and more consistent, and if they can keep Peyton Watson, I think that's going to be huge. They also added in Marvin Bagley, who is a more athletic backup big than Jonas Valanciunas was, which could help their second unit. And the draft picks of Trevin Brazile and Bryce Hopkins both looked really good in the Summer League. I'm just not sure how much they're going to contribute next season. And the West is not waiting around. San Antonio and Oklahoma City are rising fast, and Denver definitely has enough to win a playoff series, but if the supporting cast does not level up, Jokic may not be enough for this team to win another title. And at number 5, I have the Detroit Pistons, and Detroit has become one of the best turnaround stories that we have in the league. Since JB Bickerstaff arrived in Detroit, everything changed. They got their first playoff win since 2008, won their first series since 2008, and finished as the number 1 team in the Eastern Conference last season. Cade Cunningham is obviously the engine that makes everything go. Ausar Thompson is definitely a swing piece on their roster, but Jalen Duren is going to be the biggest question mark of this offseason as to whether or not he returns or goes elsewhere. Also, they lost Tobias Harris and traded Isaiah Stewart, which already hurts the front court, so if Duren leaves too, that could be a major problem, but I still trust the core that Detroit has. However, I do think they need to make one more move to become a real title team. And up next at number 4, I have the Philadelphia 76ers, the biggest winners of this offseason, no questions asked. And after signing LeBron James, this might be the most talented roster in the NBA on paper. Now, the questions are obvious around them. Joel Embiid has to stay healthy. LeBron is no longer in his prime, although he's still amazing. And there are only so many touches to split between Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, LeBron, Jaylen Brown, and VJ Edgecombe. But the upside of this team is absolutely ridiculous. Embiid still bends defenses inside. Maxey brings speed and creation. LeBron gives them size, IQ, and another playoff decision maker. And Jaylen Brown going from a top second option in the league to maybe their 4th option is just absurd. Add in Anthony Simons and Dean Wade off the bench, and Philly has the roster and real title upside. But coming in at number 3, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the Thunder are still one of the best teams in basketball, even after making some cost-cutting moves this offseason. Now, they lost Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins, and now traded away Lou Dort, which hurts, but Oklahoma City has built one of the deepest pipelines that we have in the league. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is still the headliner. Jalen Williams getting healthier is massive. AJ Mitchell being closer to 100% matters as well. And then they extended Isaiah Hartenstein and added Ade Mara and Bennett Sturts in the draft. So overall, this team is still loaded. And after losing to San Antonio in the Western Conference Finals, I expect OKC to come back with a serious edge. But coming in at number 2, I have the San Antonio Spurs, and honestly, you can make a real case for them to be at number 1. Victor Wembanyama already took this team to the NBA Finals, and now the roster is older, deeper, and just overall more experienced. Dylan Harper and Stephon Castle give them elite young guard talent. Tobias Harris coming in is huge and adds shooting, size, and veteran stability. Then they drafted Jaden Quaintance, which gives them another powerful front court piece behind Wemby as long as he can get healthy. And I think the only real concern is the experience under pressure, because that showed up in the finals, but that is exactly what young teams learn from. San Antonio is not just ahead of schedule anymore. They are a real championship threat, and I would not be surprised if we saw them back in the finals next season. But coming in at number 1 as my top team in the NBA, I have the New York Knicks. And when you win the championship and bring back your entire starting 5, you deserve the top spot in my opinion. Now, the Knicks did lose Mitchell Robinson this offseason, and that matters, but they replaced him with Andre Drummond, which keeps them functional at the backup center position. They also brought back Landry Shamet and Jose Alvarado, which is huge for their identity off the bench. And the biggest thing here with this roster is the continuity continuity. New York does not have to reinvent anything. They already know who they are, and they already have built that chemistry. Now, no team has repeated since the Warriors in 2017 and 2018, but I think the Knicks have the roster, the chemistry, and the talent to seriously threaten that streak. But that wraps it up for my rankings. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts, and let me know who you thought I had way too high or way too low. Also, if you enjoy the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.